Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this webinar on how to turn social media data into new business opportunities. Firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Alina. I'm a marketing manager at USCAN. I'm going to be just the host of today's webinar, and please let me know if you have any questions. We're going to have a short Q&A session after the webinar, so feel free to drop your questions, whether in chat or in the Q&A window. And of course, our today's main speaker is Tania. She's the head of insights in Navico. And I also want to quickly go through what the USCAN is. So USCAN is an AI-powered social media intelligence platform. We are present in more than 5 countries around the world, and we are really proud to say that we are working with more than 500 brands and agencies across the world, including Google, McDonald's, Samsung, and of course, Navico. And we've been widely recognized by different industry experts. We were named visual analysis category winner in the report by SaaS Advisor, and we were also recognized by Gartner, Crossdesk, G2 Crowd, and Martech Breakthrough Awards. And now I pass it over to Tania.
Thanks, Alina. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I just set myself up for success here. See some people are still joining. Welcome. Thank you. So I'm going to do a little introduction about myself. Hopefully it's not too long and I don't bore you too much, but I did want to just give you an overview of my past experience and why you should believe anything that I tell you today. So the first part of my career was very numbers driven. Lots of number crunching, statistics, risk profiles, calculation, go-to-market strategies. But the second half of my career has really been where I must say I've enjoyed it the most, which is very much focused on social media and marketing analytics. And so social media is really the one I want to focus on today. But all in all, across both of these, what it really is about data. And I really love the data. So a little bit about social media, just some brands that I've worked on in the past. Maybe you'll recognize some of those, really across various industries and various sectors that I've done quite a bit of work on. And from a political/economic view, a few years ago, we really wanted to see how social media can really capture people's opinions and feelings. And so we attempted to predict the outcome of Brexit. And so a couple of days before that happened, we noticed that people were far more supportive. And we accurately predicted that the UK was going to leave the EU. And this really made us sit back and go, oh, wow, perhaps there's something in here and that you can really use social media to do predictive analytics. And so to see whether it was simply a fluke or if there's actually something here, we went on this journey in 2016 to try and predict the outcome of the US election. And so a week before the election results, I started noticing a massive increase in support for Donald Trump on social media. And I approached my CEO and said, there's something going on here. It's going against everything that the polls are saying. But I believe what I'm seeing. I believe in my methodologies. I believe in the data. And so I'm kind of putting my head on the block here and saying we are going to predict that Trump will win the 2016 election. And so there's our CEO with 1 day to go before the election results, sitting on BBC and saying that our social media data prediction is that Trump will win the election. To say I was nervous is an understatement, putting our names on the line there, but it all worked out for the better. And what this really showcased was that social media has come of age and that you can really use it to predict outcomes and to get an understanding of people's thoughts and feelings. And then my career highlights, without a doubt, was when I was able to present my analysis and insights to the chief economist at the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, and he really enjoyed what we were able to show him and how to use technologies like social media sentiment analytics to help understand what is the driving factors in economics. And so that is why we're here today, is to see what we can do with social media. So to focus a little bit on UScan and why specifically I really love using UScan's technology. The first thing, without a doubt, is the accuracy of their sentiment. I know I can go in and with confidence say that if we're going to make a decision, it's going to be based on accurate data. Secondly is the automation of grouping those conversations within topics that makes it really easy for us to quickly jump into the platform and see what is driving the sentiment of our consumers across various brands. This is something that our brand leads use all the time, to have a quick view of whether there's a change in the market for the month. And then lastly, of course, the technology, the insights that we gain from visual analytics, specifically from a competitor point of view, to be able to detect how people are using brands in various situations, really gives you insight into where people are, what their surroundings are, and how do you fit into their lives. And so that is just 3 of the reasons why I really love working with UScan. Okay, so without further ado, let's just run through what we are going to be learning today. So the first thing is really going to be how to find consumer insights and how to formulate strong hypotheses. This is something that I know is quite hard to do when working with unstructured data. So I hope today I can give you a little bit of inspiration in how you can go about doing that. And then once you have those insights and you've tested your hypothesis, how are you going to actually sell your findings to your stakeholders to get them to really buy into that story that you're telling them through your data? And then lastly, how do you take that insights that you have discovered and how do you make sure that they are actually relevant and applicable to the brand and that the business can use it to make decisions and that they are actually actionable? Okay, so I'm a statistician, so bear with me. I always start with the methodology slide. And from my experience, I think a lot of the struggles comes with how do you get to the insights? And I think people forget that without a hypothesis, you can kind of get lost and go down little rabbit holes. I think we've all experienced that with social media, that there's so much and you can get really lost in it. And so I believe there's 2 main things. Hypothesis and insights, they go hand in hand. You can't separate them out. And people often have a misunderstanding of what a hypothesis really is. And so just from my point of view, a really easy way to understand it is when you look at your data and you see something that you didn't expect to see, something that makes you go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, I didn't expect to see that. That is really where your clue is that you can build an hypothesis. And then what you do is you come up with certain ideas. This is happening because of this reason. And so what that is you're coming up with possible explanations of what is happening within this data. And so once you then start to interrogate all these thoughts that you have and looking at your data, what that ultimately leads to is your insight, because you can build a really deep and accurate understanding of what is driving that strange occurrence that you have seen in your data. And so once you have that, what really happens is that unexplained occurrence turns into something that is explained. And that is what you can take back to your stakeholders and tell them what is really happening. And it turns really that what into the why and to the so what. So now that you have those insights, what happens is that you often find yourself in a space that you're not sure how to position it to your stakeholders and the people that you're speaking to get them to really see what you are seeing. And it's all about influencing your stakeholders to believe what you are telling them. And I always go back to Dale Carnegie. It's so old. Some people might not have heard of them. It's been around for ages. But one thing that always sticks with me is if you can get your audience and your stakeholders to agree with you twice, quite early on, they almost have that affinity where they can sit back and go, what you are telling me, I believe what you are saying. And that's why I'm going to listen to the insights. And I believe that the data that you're showing me is giving me an accurate and representative view of the world out there and of my customers and of my business. So it's sounds very simple, yes, yes, but I'll show you in practice how you can get them to agree with you. And then the second thing is where you can get people to really buy into your story. It's just simply putting it into perspective for them. So, you know, we all look at things from a different way, but in a very practical manner, to put it into perspective, simply phrase it in a way where you can say, this is more important than this, and this is why you have to pay attention. It's really trying to get to that point where you can tell your stakeholders, why do they have to care about this thing that you're telling them more than something else? And so just think it in basic mathematical terms. This is more prevalent than this, or this is less negative than this. So put it in perspective why they should care about it. Okay, so lots of theory. But you're probably thinking now, okay, great, you have told us all the theory, but how does it actually work in the real world? And hopefully you're not as confused as that dark looks. So let me see if I can uncover this a little bit for you. So like I said, first formulate your hypothesis, and then you can gain your insights from it. So the hypothesis is really when you start looking at the data that's telling you the what. And so in general terms, this is usually what we call social media monitoring. When we look at the numbers, it's simply telling us something is up or down. So if you log into your UScan platform, what you see on your analytics dashboard, that is usually your what. Okay, your total mentions for the month has gone up, your authors is up, your sentiment is up, your engagement up. That's really what's happening. But now we notice something and see, oh, okay, that's interesting. Our sentiment score is up by 10% this month. Usually it's quite flat. And so we wonder why that is. Well, we actually launched a new coffee flavor this month. And so perhaps that is what is driving this new positive sentiment. And so you can think about a whole different types of scenarios that could potentially be the answer for that increase in sentiment. And so now that you kind of have your what is happening, you then move into your why. And your why you're really only going to understand when you start looking at the conversations behind these numbers. But we all know of social media, that's a lot easier said than done, because ultimately we're working here with unstructured data, which makes it really hard to try and figure out what is driving that sentiment. It's not easy to do, but with a little bit of practice, you can get there. And so what you ultimately have to do is you have to take this unstructured conversations that people are having, and you have to structure it in a way so that you can quantify it, to go back to the place where you can put it into perspective in numerical values where you say, this is more important than that. So my process of doing this, of structuring the data, starts in an ideation phase. So I will think, before I go and investigate my data, I will think about all the possible topics that people will speak about. So I'm going to stick with the coffee shop example, and I will think about all the different things that people will talk about in relation to a coffee shop. So they will talk about the type of drinks that they serve, the type of foods that's available, the taste of their drinks. If it's a big coffee shop, perhaps the Wi-Fi that's available when you go sit there and work, the quality of the products, your barista, the staff. There's a whole variety of topics that people will talk about. And so that's your ideation phase. Just think very broadly in everything that people could speak about. And then once you have that, you will start structuring your data. And there's different ways that you can structure this data, but always keep in mind what the hypothesis that you're trying to prove. And so there's no right or wrong way to structure your data. The point is that you have to think about a structure that's really going to help you to answer the question, solve the problem, or test the hypothesis that you're trying to prove. And so once you've now built your structure that you feel is quite relevant and will help you, you then just go and you tag your data. And so what I generally do is I'll use keywords, go and find the conversations that's related to the topics that I wrote down in ideation. I'll tag them, and then I'll keep refining it. I'll tag, I'll exclude that tag and see what conversations left, and keep tagging and doing that process over and over again. And so to validate whether I've really covered everything that I wanted to cover, my kind of test that I do is I'll filter the emotive conversation, because that's really where the value of our data lies, is that positive and negative feelings that people are having. So if you filter to that, and you exclude all of the data that you tag, you should be left with less than 30% of your overall emotive conversations. So what we're really aiming towards and working towards is being able to capture 70% of the thoughts and feelings that people have into some sort of structure. Because you have to remember that every time you take away some data, your sample size gets smaller and smaller, and your results become less and less reliable. So if you're only working with, let's say 50% is your emotive data, that's already 50% of your sample. So you want to really make sure that you can capture as much of that conversation as possible. And then is the fun part where you start analyzing your data. And remember, you can always go back into any of these other steps where you can ideate again, you can structure data again. This is a process that will keep happening over and over again until you really get to a structure that you feel is best suited for your industry or your company, and you're happy with that. Okay, so enough theory, let's get into it. We're going to work with Star Wars coffee. So this is a real problem in the real world where a certain coffee shop, we'll call them Star Wars coffee for now, approached us and said, we're really having this issue where we're not getting enough people into our stores during the afternoon. So everyone goes in the morning, they get their morning coffee, but we're really struggling to get people in the afternoons. And so what's important to remember here is there's no hypothesis here about why it's happening. There's only a problem statement. So we have to go and try and figure out what the hypothesis is that we're trying to prove here. Okay, so as we know, we're going to start with ideate, and I've kind of mentioned a few topics that you can think about, so like hot beverages and cold beverages, and you can go as granular or as high level, but usually get a good coverage of the type of things that people will talk about. Okay, so we're happy that we've kind of got the gist of the topics that people will discuss in relation to Star Wars coffee. And now we're going to take these topics and we are going to put them into a structure. So what we're going to do is we're going to group hot beverages, anything related to beverages, we're going to group that together. The quality of the food, the taste of the food, we're going to group them together. The knowledge that the staff has and baristas, we're going to put them under staff, and then anything that's related to the in-store experience, we're going to put them together. This is not the only way you can structure data. You can obviously also structure it in relation to how your company functions, so operations or customer service. If there's a specific hypothesis you want to test in relation to, for instance, your operations or your logistics, you can group it and structure it in a different way. So for instance, putting everything that's related to operations together, or in this case, food and beverages will fall under product to give you a product category. So there's really various ways to do this. And be patient with yourself. It takes a lot of practice to get to a point where you have a topic structure that's really good enough for you to work with. And so once you have that, like I said, you just go and tag your data. And so make this really easy for yourself when you tag it so that you can always go back and refine it and go, look how these topics interact with each other. So if we, for instance, tag beverages, make sure, or hot beverages, have your primary, so we'll call this a second group, our primary versus our secondary topics. Have your primary topics first, because you can always filter again to just looking at your primary and then name your secondary. And if you even want to add a third layer to that, just name your topic and add a third layer to say we are going to, under hot beverages, we're going to segment it further down, and we're going to have cappuccinos and lattes and macchiatos further down into our topic. So you can really go as granular as you want. Then you validate, of course, to make sure that you've covered as much of your emotive topics as you want to, and go back and tag it, or we say, cool, we are happy now with what we have. So we are now going to start analyzing this data. And we're going to keep in mind the problem statement that we're trying to solve. Okay, we need to get more people into the stores in the afternoon. Okay, so the way that we're going to first structure this data is by breaking this group of conversations down into conversations that happens in the mornings versus conversations that happens in the evenings. And there's two ways that you could do this. The first way is that you can actually look at the time that people are tweeting, to say tweets that happened, or Facebook posts or Instagram posts that happened in the morning time frame versus in the afternoon. But you could also, through keyword matching, gather when someone talks about breakfast, we are going to assume that that was the morning conversation. So you can do two rounds of segmentation to get your morning and afternoon conversations. There's not just one way that you can go about it. And so if we look at this, what we can see here is that there's only about half the amount of conversations in the afternoons than what there is in the morning. Okay, so this is something where you might go, well, yeah, obviously, because people don't drink coffee in the afternoons and it's a coffee shop. Well, this is exactly it. You want that point to go, yes, this is obvious, because this is your first yes that we spoke about. So this is the point where you actually go, Mr. Stakeholder, do you agree with this? Yes, this is exactly what we expect to see. So this is a point of validation for your data. And you can get a clue about that as well in the problem statement. Just by reading the problem statement, you will know that you expect less conversations in the afternoon because this is a problem that they're trying to solve. And probably their revenue is showing that they are getting less customers in the afternoon than in the morning. So we are happy with this. We know that we have a point of validation. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and dig a little bit deeper, because right now we don't really have enough conversation to really help us, or we don't have enough points of reference to help us formulate a hypothesis. All we know is what we're seeing in front of us is relative to what the problem statement is. So let's go and dig a little bit deeper. So we're going to use our topic structure, and we're just going to look at the volume of conversation, morning versus evening, of our high level conversational topics. And so we know that food and beverages are a little bit more prominent than staff and in-store experiences, but what is really interesting is the fact that there's very little difference in the amount of conversation about food in the morning versus the evenings. But even more than that, people talk more about food than beverages in the afternoon. And so this is a really interesting discovery, because it's a coffee shop and people go for beverages. And so you kind of expect people to talk about the drinks, but actually people talk about the foods. So that's really interesting. And so at this point, we can make a decision about whether we want to further investigate these categories, or we're going to go on the path of just looking at food and beverages. And so we're going to say, let's first look at food and beverages. We have a feeling that this is where the real value is going to lie. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to focus only on food and beverage topics, use our secondary topics, and break it down to sentiment, because that's where we really understand what people like and dislike. So now we've broken it down. This is the net sentiment per topic. So net sentiment, the positive minus the negative. And here we can see some more yes points. And so at this point in time, what you really want to say to your stakeholder and get them to, again, say, yes, yes, we agree, is people love your hot beverages, which is your coffee. People love your coffee. And he will say, yes, people do love our coffee. So you get them to say yes again. People also love the taste of all your drinks, your cold and hot drinks. Oh, that's great. Yes. So you get them to buy into your story. And so what we see here is two really big differences. We see that the sentiment towards cold beverages in the afternoon is far more prominent than in the mornings. And so this could lead us to say a few things. Well, yes, we expect to see that. People tend to not drink coffee in the afternoons because it's got a high caffeine content. Perhaps it's summertime, so people are more naturally going to drink cold beverages in the afternoon because it's summer. And so there's various things that you could hypothesize about why cold beverages are so prominent in the afternoon. And then something else that we see here, for instance, is that there are only two topics where there are more negative conversations than positive, which is the food variety and specifically the lunch food. And so just looking at these two, we can kind of form another hypothesis to say these two must be related in some sort of fashion. The food variety and lunch food, there's some relationship here because they are the only two that's negative. And so we can again think about, okay, seeing this, I think that perhaps the variety of food that's on offer for lunch isn't enough. Perhaps it's not good quality. Perhaps people don't like the taste, although that doesn't seem that could be the case because taste of food is quite popular. So perhaps it's not about the taste. There's definitely something in the variety. Perhaps there isn't enough. So, okay, so now that we kind of have a few hypotheses to work with, let's go investigate. So let's first look at this cold beverages. Perhaps there's something here that is really driving a lot of traffic already in the afternoons that we can leverage and say, do more of that. So let's have a look. We just create a little word cloud of all the positive sentiment towards cold beverages. And what we see here is Tuesday free drink. Oh yes, of course. Every Tuesday there's a promotion where Star Wars Coffee gives a free beverage on a Tuesday afternoon if you have the app. And so we can see that this is obviously a very successful campaign. But there's nothing else here. We can see the spikes if we put it on a line, that this is what's driving the sentiment on Tuesday afternoon. But then we have to look and think about the variety. We just go back here. What is happening here, right? So we haven't really found anything that is life-changing here. But if we now start to look at the variety and food topics, and you can see I've just broken it down one step further to be really specific about what people are talking about in terms of the variety and lunch foods, we immediately see there's something that stands out here, and that is gluten-free options. And we go, oh, that's really interesting. So obviously, Star Wars Coffee doesn't have gluten-free options, or they don't have many gluten-free options. So what we really want to say here is that the lack of gluten-free options are causing people to not visit the store in the afternoons. And so a few examples, if we look at this, is my family and I love Star Wars Coffee, but my son is gluten intolerant, so we can't have lunch there because you don't have any options for him. And another one says, come on, Star Wars Coffee, it's 2019. Where are your gluten-free options? Seems like my lunches will be at CoStar. And so when we look at the conversations, the tweets, the Facebook posts, the Instagram posts, we see that people mention certain things. So for instance, baked goods, if they talk about croissants or they talk about muffins, these you can all group together as baked goods, or people, soup is really easy to find. If you type soup in, you can tag soup, conversation, sandwiches. So these are really easy keywords, similar to a word cloud that you can pick up when you filter, for instance, on that category that we created for foods. And so we can even just look for gluten. If you type gluten in your search bar in UScan, you can tag all of those and then see what the sentiment is. So, okay, so now that we have seen this is what people were talking about, that there's a lack of gluten-free options. Okay, real world example, we go back to the Star Wars Coffee executives and said, hey, we have solved your problem for you. The fact that you don't have gluten-free options in your stores is the reason that people don't have lunch at your stores. So we went and told them, and this was their response. But we have lots of gluten-free options. The big problem here was that the customer's perception was that you don't have gluten-free options. And so what happened is, because people perceived them to not have gluten-free options, they didn't go to have their lunches there. And so how do you solve this problem? Very easily. You just make it more prominent that you have gluten-free options. And so what is really interesting here is, if you look at their stickers that's all over their fridges, you can see there's a little icon here that says gluten-free. No one of their customers noticed that. And so it was a very easy, actionable thing that they could do, but just making bigger signage to say, yeah, are gluten-free snacks. And so if you look at it from just looking at the snacks, it's obviously gluten-free, but calling it out and making it prominent when you walk into the store and you see immediately gluten-free, it changes people's perception when you walk into the store. So just adding a few little call outs to say, here is delicious and gluten-free options. As simple as that. And that's really how easy it is to structure the data to get your insights. So let's just recap, and then we can run into some questions, and I'm happy to go back and explain in more detail if anyone wants some clarification. But just at a high level, always start with your hypothesis, let your data lead you in terms of where your hypothesis that you can build, and then that will ultimately lead to the insight that can help you solve the problem that your customer is facing or that your own company is facing. Get your audience to buy in by telling them something that they already know so that they agree with you, but also tell them something positive about their brand that they will also agree with, so that they can build that trust in you and the data, and that it's validating what they're seeing in the organization. And then look for those known data points where you already know there's more conversations in the morning than in the afternoons. That gives you another point of validation to really stress test that what you are looking at and the data set that you have really is the right one to look at. And so I'll hand over now and open up to any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tanya. It was very interesting and insightful, especially this example with like this insight about the absence of the gluten-free products. This is something like you always thinking that, yeah, it's just very simple thing, but you should really dig deeper in order to get this insight from the existing social media data. So yeah, we are starting our Q&A session right now, and we already have a couple of questions, but guys, please don't be afraid to drop your questions if something is still not clarifying. So, so our first question is, how much data is enough to make sure that the hypothesis worth validating?
Yep, so a statistically representative sample, I always work with 2,000. So that will give you a really good, that will give you at a 95% confidence interval about 1 to 2% margin of error, but I would never go less than about 500 mentions. You also have to understand your audience and your own data set. And if you can find those data points that validate what you are seeing, then you could go a little bit lower, but I wouldn't go anything less than 500 mentions. And so sometimes all you have to do is just look at a longer period of time or combine some brands together to get an industry view to make that sample a little bigger, so you can get creative and how do you grow that sample of conversation that you look at.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is, can you detail what do you mean by conversations? Yeah.
Okay, so conversations is, I believe, in the UScan app, it's mentions. So every tweet, every Facebook post, every Instagram post, in my mind, it's a conversation, because what essentially happens is someone will put a piece of content out there and people will react to it in the comments. And so that whole thread is really a conversation. But if you think about in reality, it's all conversations that people are having. Instead of talking over a Zoom call, people just tweet their thoughts. And so when I talk about conversations, it's any type of text-based piece of content that is posted on social media.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and our next question is actually quite similar to what we just asked. So what are the keywords and where did you get those words?
Yep. So keywords is in your conversation itself. So a good way to start with your keywords is word cloud. See what people are talking about and then try and structure those keywords. Obviously, when you start to build your data set, that is when you start to build, for instance, in UScan, when you set up your topics and you have to type in the keywords, a good place to start is simply to go to Twitter and go to Instagram, go to the pages, the brand's page, and actually read through a few of the conversations that mentions what are the phrases people are using, what does the comments say. You can pick up quite quickly just by reading through Instagram and Twitter posts what people are talking to in relation to that topic.
Thank you. Right, our next question is from Nathan. So how do you handle objections that social media data is biased towards the nosy minority?
So that is where it becomes quite important to first start with those 2 points where someone agrees with you, because if you always go back to that point and say, so you can't accept just a subsection of the data. If you accept a portion of the data that represents what you're seeing in your business, then you can't deny that the other parts of it is also true. So getting that buy-in from your stakeholder to agree with you at the start and showing them points of validation. And you can go search online for annual statements of an organization and get some information there about their revenue has up, or they had issues with their customer service, or they had some store closures. And so if you can take that known data points that is out there that you know is the truth, and you can validate that using social media data, it becomes really hard for someone to disagree with you because you're telling them something that you already know is the truth. So that's why the 2 yeses at the start kind of set you up for them to not disagree with you. So I know that's easier said than done, but maybe give it a shot.
Yeah, right. And another question is, what tips can you give if I want to start my business database from scratch? Don't be scared of irrelevant data. You own your queries. You always have to refine it. 3-4 months in, you're still going to refine your queries. So be willing to get irrelevant data and see what people are talking about, and filter it out in that way. So the best thing that I would say is just start collecting it, anything that you can think of, and then refine it over time. You're not going to start with a perfect data set. It takes time because you're working with unstructured data, you're working with people's conversations. People don't generally speak in the way we think they speak. So yeah, just start and see what you get. Right. So yeah, I guess we covered all the questions. Oh, sorry, we just have one. Is there a way to determine statistical significance from social media data? Yes, and it's the same as you would do for any survey. So if you think about, there's a great tool that I always use. I think it's called Survey Calculator. It's a website, and all you do is you take your total group of conversation. Let's say you have 10,000 mentions for the month. You pop it in there. You say, I want 5% margin of error, and it tells you what a statistically relevant sample is. And so remember, anything above 2,000 doesn't really matter. Even if your population size is 60 million, 2,000 is going to give you the same result. So don't ever go higher than 2,000. It becomes irrelevant beyond that point. And so a good way to also validate that is think about if you can figure out how many customers a brand has, and then relate your numbers, your volume of conversations, or your unique authors that you have. Say that they represent about 10, even if they just represent 50% of the feelings and thoughts of your organization, and 50% of them change their behavior, what impact will that have in terms of revenue? If you know the value of a customer, what is their lifetime value, and you can change 10 people's opinions, what would that actually equate to in money? And so often just putting that in perspective of how valuable that customer is in real terms, then it doesn't matter that they only represent 50% of your conversation, because that's 50% that can make a difference. Yeah, right. Thank you. Another question is, would you describe your work as based on qualitative data? How so? And if not, why not? I think it's qualitative and quantitative. I like to call it conversational analytics, because that's what you do, is you're analyzing people's conversations. But you can't take the qualitative or the quantitative out of it, because they have to work in unison. If you're only looking at the conversations, the pushback that you're going to get from executives is, so what? Why do I have to care? Sure, it's 10 people's opinion, it's 15 people's opinion. We have 10,000 customers, but those 10 people represent 10,000 customers. If you can quantify to say, we know that we have X amount of customers buying this product, and we have X amount of customers talking about this product. And so that is how you can build that relationship between a known data point and your social media data point, is use your internal knowledge about the business or the brand or the product. Right. Thank you. So I guess we ran out of questions for today. Thank you very much for being with us. So you're going to receive a webinar recording tomorrow, so don't worry. If you still have any questions, feel free to message me on LinkedIn or just message Tanya on LinkedIn if you still have any like clarifications to do. If you want to schedule a demo on UScan and see how to find basically these conversations and mentions and keywords and how to find insights based on the social media data around your brand, feel free to go to uscan.io or just drop us message at info@uscan.io. So that's basically it. That's a wrap. Thank you so much again. Thank you for your time. It was a really big pleasure to do this webinar today. Thank you so much. Have a great day and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alina.